In this tutorial, we're talking about objects. Actually, we've already looked at objects before when we were talking about arrays, because arrays are a specialized kind of object in JavaScript. Mostly what we're going to do in this tutorial is create object literals. And we have a few examples of object literals here, which is this one, and this one, and this one. So when we create these objects with the curly braces, that's creating an object literal. Let's talk about what objects are. Objects are an unordered collection of properties. We saw with arrays, even though array is also a kind of object, that they're an ordered collection of properties. But objects are mostly an unordered collection of properties. So let's look at some variables here. I create a variable empty, which is an object literal, and it's an empty object. We have another empty object here, and this one was created with a constructor. But actually this one and this one, they're the same. They're both empty objects. And we have variable lang, and that's set to an object, and inside it has three properties. This is a property's name and the property's value, and another object here. It also has three properties in it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to loop through the elements, or we're going to loop through the properties in the object. And we looked at this before when we were looping through the DOM, because the DOM is also a whole bunch of objects, with the window being the top level object, and we loop through that, and then we loop through the properties inside the window, and so on. So let's take a look at this. We're saying for all of the properties in Anthony, output the property's name and output the property's value. Let's take a look at that. Okay, and we get this kind of output. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to give our Anthony object a new property. And that property is set to a property that's in another object. So we have this lang object here, and it has the property eng, which has a value of English. And this property that we're adding on to our Anthony object is going to make a reference to this one. So with objects, they are a reference object. So when we add this property onto our Anthony object here, it's going to make a reference to this lang object, and then this property in the lang object. Okay, let's take a look at that. So what we're doing now is the same thing, and we're looping through Anthony again, and we're taking a look at it. And now you can see that I've added on the new property onto my object, and it's coming out fine here. But keep in mind that we haven't made a copy of that property. This property, we haven't made a copy of it. We're making a reference to it inside the lang object. Now what I'm doing now is I'm creating another new property on my Anthony object, and this lang spoken is set to an array. So one of the properties of our Anthony object is going to be an array, and inside the array has these three values. And you can see that these elements in our array are also making references to the lang object and these languages inside here. Let's take a look at that. So same thing here, we're looping through Anthony and looking at it. Let's see that. Okay, and now you can see this came out fine. Both this and this is making references to those other objects. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to try to delete this lang spoken. So lang spoken was an array, and the last element of the array was Chinese. So I'm going to try and delete that element in the array from my object. Let's do that. And this isn't going to do anything here because we're not outputting it. And then we're going to loop through Anthony again and take a look at it. And you can see what happened here, which was we don't see Chinese anymore here, but we still see a comma, and that gives us a hint that there's still another element in this array, perhaps an undefined element, because if there were only two elements in this array, then we wouldn't see a comma here. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to check the length of lang spoken. So we're writing this out, and then we're saying anthony.langspoken.length and checking that out, and you can see that it's 3. So there's definitely something still behind this French one here. So what we can do to look at that a bit closer, we're setting I to 0, and then we've looked at while loops before, and we're going to loop through. We're going to loop through the we're looping through the Anthony object, but we're looping through, or sorry, what we're doing is, right here, we're looping through the lang spoken property of the Anthony object because it's an array. So we're going to loop through this array, which itself is inside the object. Let's see that. Okay, and we can see we have English, French, and undefined. So what it did was it didn't delete the element in the array, but it did delete its value. So that element is still there, but before it had a value, and now it has a value of undefined. And what we're doing now is we are going to run the pop method on this array to try and remove that last element, which was Chinese, and now it's undefined, but now we're trying to remove it, and then we're going to loop through it. Let's see that. Okay, and now we can see it's English, French, and if we check the length of this array, it would only be two elements now. Thanks for listening.